When you think of European kings, who comes to mind? Maybe Henry VIII, Louis XIV, or Charles V. Men with pale faces, silk robes, and golden crowns. But what if I told you that some of Europe's most powerful rulers, men who built cities, led armies, and changed history, had African roots? Yes, long before the slave trade, before colonialism changed everything, Africa and Europe were deeply connected. People, ideas, and power flowed both ways. And among those connections were black kings, rulers whose stories were later buried, misrepresented, or simply forgotten. In this documentary, we'll uncover the lives of 10 forgotten black kings of Europe. Some were conquerors. Some were governors turned monarchs. Some ruled from palaces, others from the battlefield. Their names may not appear in modern history books, but their legacies shaped Europe more than we realize. Let's begin our journey, from the sands of North Africa to the castles of Spain, from Sicily's shores to the heart of medieval Europe, to remember the kings who reigned, and the history that time tried to erase. 1. Tariq ibn Ziyad, the man who named Gibraltar. The year is 711 AD. A powerful Berber general named Tariq ibn Ziyad, serving under the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate, stands on the coast of North Africa, gazing toward the mountains across the sea. In front of him, the narrow Strait of Gibraltar. Behind him, an army of Africans and Arabs, ready to sail. When Tariq lands on European soil, he climbs the tallest rock on the coast. That rock would one day be named after him. Jabal al-Tariq, the Mountain of Tariq. Over time, the name became Gibraltar. Tariq led his army against the Visigothic king Roderick and won a decisive battle. It was one of history's great turning points. In a matter of months, most of Spain fell under his control. For the next several years, Tariq ruled cities, appointed governors, collected taxes, and made laws. He was, by every measure, a king in Europe, though history rarely calls him one. Later writers often tried to downplay his African heritage, describing him only as an Arab commander. But Tariq was Amazi, a Berber, an African. His victory changed the map of Europe for centuries. The Muslim kingdom he founded in Spain, known as Al-Andalus, lasted for nearly 800 years. And it all began with a black general from Africa who dared to cross the sea and change the world. 2. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, the Desert Emperor. 3 centuries later, another African would follow Tariq's path. But this time, he would rule an empire so large it stretched from Senegal to Spain. His name was Yusuf ibn Tashfin. Born around 1009 in the Western Sahara, Yusuf was part of the Sanhaja Berber tribe. From humble beginnings, he rose to power as a military commander, uniting desert tribes under a movement called the Almoravids. Yusuf was not just a warrior. He was a visionary ruler who believed in justice and faith. His empire covered what is now Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria, and large parts of Spain. In 1086, Muslim rulers in Spain asked Yusuf for help against Christian armies pushing south. Yusuf crossed the sea with thousands of soldiers and defeated King Alfonso VI at the Battle of Sagrajas. After that, the Spanish Muslim rulers begged him to stay. So he did. He took control of their kingdoms and became the ruler of both North Africa and Iberia. He built the great city of Marrakesh, ruled fairly, and ensured peace through strict but balanced laws. Yet most European history books never call Yusuf a European ruler. They call him a foreign invader. But think about it. If ruling large parts of Spain doesn't make you a European monarch, what does? Yusuf ibn Tashfin was a black African king whose empire shaped both continents. His story reminds us that Africa and Europe were never separate worlds. They were neighbors, sharing the same sky. 3. Hasan al-Kalbi, the African king of Sicily. Travel east, across the Mediterranean, and we reach Sicily, the sunny island at the tip of Italy. In the 10th century, Sicily was not ruled by Italians or Normans. It was ruled by Africans. The ruler was Hasan al-Kalbi, founder of the Kalbid dynasty. His family came from Tunisia in North Africa. When he became governor, he turned Sicily into one of the richest and most cultured places in Europe. He built roads, improved trade, and welcomed scholars and artists from Africa and the Middle East. Under his rule, Palermo became a magnificent city, full of gardens, fountains, and marble palaces. It was said that you could hear music and poetry echoing through its streets at night. Hasan ruled with wisdom, balancing the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities who lived under him. For over a century, the Kalbid kings, all of African descent, ruled Sicily. But when later European powers took over, they erased that chapter of history. Hasan al-Kalbi's story shows that African kings once ruled a European island, and that their legacy still lives in the architecture and culture of Sicily today. 4. Almanzor, the Shadow King of Spain. Our next figure is known not by birthright, but by brilliance. Almanzor, or Almanzor ibn Abi Amir, rose from humble origins in 10th century Córdoba, the capital of Muslim Spain. He began as a secretary, managing documents for powerful men. But his intelligence and charm caught the attention of the royal court. Within a few years, Almanzor became the chief minister, the most powerful position next to the caliph himself. His mother was of Berber descent, linking him again to North Africa. Almanzor ruled with unmatched authority. Though he never called himself king, he was the real ruler of Spain for nearly 25 years. He led over 50 military campaigns into Christian lands and never lost a single one. His name struck fear across Europe. But Almanzor was more than a warrior. He was a builder. He founded schools, sponsored scholars, and built palaces that rivaled anything in Europe. After his death in 1002, Christian historians portrayed him as a villain, the terror of Spain. But within Al-Andalus, he was remembered as a man of justice and vision. In truth, he was a black leader who ruled one of Europe's greatest civilizations from the shadows of the throne. 5. Musa ibn Nusayr, the governor of two worlds. Before Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed into Spain, one man made it all possible: Musa ibn Nusayr. Musa was the governor of North Africa under the Umayyad Caliphate. He trained soldiers, built ships, and expanded his rule across Morocco and Algeria. When he sent Tariq across the sea, it wasn't just a mission. It was part of a plan to connect Africa and Europe. After Tariq's victory, Musa followed with a larger army. He captured city after city until most of Spain was under his control. At his height, Musa ruled lands stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pyrenees Mountains, more territory than most European kings ever dreamed of. He created new roads, encouraged trade between Africa and Europe, and brought in new crops and ideas. But when he returned home, jealous rivals accused him of ambition and stripped him of his titles. Like so many African leaders in Europe, his story was rewritten to make him seem less important. Yet his influence lasted for generations. Musa ibn Nusayr was a bridge between two continents, a man who showed how connected Africa and Europe really were. 6. Saint Maurice, the Black Saint of the Empire. Our next figure didn't rule through armies or politics. He ruled through faith. His name was Saint Maurice, leader of the Theban Legion, a group of African Christian soldiers from Egypt who served in the Roman army around the 3rd century AD. When ordered to persecute other Christians, Maurice and his men refused. They were executed for their faith. Centuries later, Saint Maurice became one of the most honored saints in medieval Europe, especially in Germany and Switzerland. Artists always showed him as a black man in shining armor, often holding a lance and wearing a crown. Emperors prayed to him before battles. Kings carried his image into war. The Holy Roman Emperor Otto I even made him the patron saint of the empire. For nearly 1,000 years, the heart of Europe worshipped a black African as its spiritual protector. But as time passed, artists began painting him with lighter skin. His African identity slowly disappeared from European memory. Yet early sculptures, still standing in places like Magdeburg Cathedral, show the truth. Saint Maurice was the Black Saint King of Europe, loved and worshipped across the continent. 7. Alfonso the Black, a royal mystery. Now we move to the late Middle Ages, to a king surrounded by mystery. Alfonso III of Aragon, who ruled parts of Spain and Sicily in the late 1200s. Some chronicles called him Alfonso the Black. Historians debate why. Was it because of his complexion, his armor, or his fierce personality? Some believe his nickname reflected African ancestry through intermarriage in the Mediterranean royal families. Remember, Sicily and Spain had both been under African influence for centuries. Whatever the truth, Alfonso was a strong and intelligent ruler. He expanded his territories, managed trade with North Africa, and strengthened his navy. If his nickname truly referred to his skin, Alfonso III stands as one of Europe's few recorded black kings during the medieval period. But after his death, portraits of him disappeared. Later writers dropped his nickname and simply called him King Alfonso. His story reminds us that color, once visible, can be erased by the brush of time. Even if Alfonso's origins remain uncertain, his example shows how fluid and diverse Europe's royal families once were. Far more than most people realize. 8. The Taifa Kings, Africa's forgotten dynasties in Europe. When the great Muslim Caliphate of Cordoba collapsed in the 11th century, it broke into dozens of small, independent kingdoms known as taifas. Across Spain, city-states like Seville, Granada, and Toledo were ruled by local kings, many of African Berber descent. These kings minted their own coins, wrote poetry, and built palaces that blended African and European art. Some ruled for decades, others for only a few years before being conquered. One of them, King Badis ibn Habus of Granada, was known for his bravery and African heritage. Another, the rulers of Badajoz and Almeria, came from Berber families who once lived in Morocco. They were kings in every sense, sovereign, wealthy, and cultured, yet history rarely calls them European. Today, when tourists walk through the Alhambra or the ruins of Andalusian castles, they're walking through the legacies of these African rulers. Their stories were forgotten not because they were unimportant, but because they didn't fit the later story of a white Europe. The Taifa kings show us a truth often hidden. For centuries, Africans ruled parts of Europe peacefully, beautifully, and proudly. 9. John Blanca, the black musician in the king's court. Now we travel north, to England, in the time of King Henry VIII, the 1500s. Among the trumpeters in the royal court stood a man named John Blanc, a talented black musician who played at every major event, from royal weddings to parades. He dressed in fine silk, rode horses, and earned a good salary. We even have his picture in the 1511 Westminster Tournament Roll, making him one of the first clearly recorded black people in English history. In that painting, John stands proudly, trumpet in hand, wearing a turban-like headdress. When one of his fellow trumpeters died, John wrote a letter to the king asking for a raise, and Henry VIII granted it. That means this African man had the confidence to speak directly to one of Europe's most powerful monarchs, and was respected enough to be heard. While John Blank wasn't a king himself, he represents something symbolic: the return of African excellence to European courts. He reminds us that black presence in Europe wasn't new, strange, or hidden. It was open, respected, and part of royal life. 10. Thomas Alexandre Dumas, the forgotten black general of France. In the late 18th century, amid revolution and empire, rose a man whose life reads like epic fiction. Thomas Alexandre Dumas was born in 1762 in Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti. His mother was an enslaved African woman. His father? A French marquis. When the marquis returned to France, he brought young Thomas Alexandre with him, not as a slave, but as his son. In France, he received education, military training, and a chance to rise. And rise he did. Dumas joined the French army and became renowned for his unmatched strength, courage, and honor. During the French Revolutionary Wars, he led thousands of men, fought in the Italian and Egyptian campaigns, and earned the respect of generals and citizens alike. He became the highest-ranking man of African descent in any Western army, long before such achievements seemed possible. Though he was never a monarch, Thomas Alexandre held power and influence, accepted within the aristocracy, and admired by many. Yet history almost erased him. But his legacy lived on, through his son, Alexandre Dumas, the famous author of The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo, stories inspired by his father's courage. This is the story of a hero history tried to forget. Now that we've met our 10 figures, let's pause and reflect. What do all these stories have in common? Each of these men, from Tariq to John Blank, shows that Africa has always been part of Europe's story. They built bridges, palaces, and empires. They ruled islands, cities, and entire continents. Yet over time, as Europe redefined itself during the Crusades, the Renaissance, and later colonization, many of these stories were erased. Christian chroniclers labeled African kings as invaders. Artists lightened their skin. Historians ignored their names. The result? A Europe that looked whiter on paper than it ever was in reality. But the evidence still whispers from the stones. The Arabic arches of the Alhambra, the African patterns in Sicilian mosaics, the dark-skinned saints in old cathedrals, the Moorish castles that crown Spanish hills. These are the fingerprints of forgotten kings. To remember them is not to rewrite history. It's to complete it. Because Europe's true story isn't one of isolation. It's one of connection. Africa was not a stranger to Europe. It was its neighbor, its ally, and sometimes its ruler. The idea of a purely white Europe is a myth born centuries later. the truth is far more beautiful. Europe was shaped by many hands, many colors, and many crowns. So, who were they again? Tariq ibn Ziyad, the African general who gave his name to Gibraltar. Musa ibn Nusayr, the man who ruled Africa and Spain. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, the desert emperor who united two worlds. Hasan al-Kalbi, the African king of Sicily. Almanzor, the shadow ruler of Cordoba. Saint Maurice, the black saint who became Europe's protector. Alfonso the Black, the mysterious king of Aragon. The Taifa kings, Africa's forgotten dynasties in Spain. John Blanc, the royal musician of England's court. Thomas Alexandre Dumas, the forgotten black general of France. Their reigns remind us that greatness knows no color. Power, intelligence, and creativity have always crossed oceans. History didn't forget them by accident. It forgot them on purpose. But now, their stories are rising again, like sunlight hitting a long-hidden crown. If you've enjoyed this journey, remember, history is not fixed. It's a story we continue to tell. And when we tell it honestly, we discover just how connected we truly are.